but we don't see any initiative clearly coming forward very soon to see that happen. We feel very strongly that the United States will adhere to its current withdrawal schedule as it's publicized. We cannot imagine seeing President Obama give any speech where he says that there will be a change in this process, nor can we see an Iraqi prime minister arguing for any change for this process. There will still, however, have to be a continued relationship because of the inherent problems that remain in Iraq. Is Iraq ready to go alone? Well, ready or not, it's coming. There are some other things that we thought in our deliberation are worth remembering or thinking about with this issue. We had a lot of debate and we did not reach consensus about whether this is a foundational or precedent-setting period. This is, after all, the formation of the second sovereign government in Iraq. But I think it can be said that many people are watching the important actions that will take place over the next months. And we know that they're important, and we know that the way the Iraqis are dealing with their new constitution and the way they're dealing with the process of selecting this new government and the way it forms relationships with other states will be important. We also felt that at this point in the ongoing conflict, every Iraqi has what we call the Kirkuk scar. In other words, there has been so much displacement. There is so much movement within the society, and there are so many Iraqi families that are starting over and over and over again that the issue of reconciliation and reintegration is fundamental. How we define that, again, remains vague, but we know it's very, very important. Another issue that we talked about it without consensus, but we understand is important, is the issue of who is reflecting the Sunni view within politics. You can talk about a Shia view, you can talk about a Kurdish view. It's very difficult to find a structure or an organization or a person that reflects the Sunni view, and that could be problematic over the future. One thing that we think is very obvious, we wouldn't call it a consensus view, but we'd call it a concern perhaps, is that there's a growing cleavage between the Iraqi people and the political elites that currently manage the country. There was a lot of supposition about what might happen over time as these elites pass out of office and new people are elected, and what impact that will have on the Iraqi-Iranian relationship and obviously with other relationships around the region. We did feel very strongly that there was a positive momentum. We did feel that there will be in Iraq, there will be a nation that is developing in a political process, and we did feel that regardless of whether the other regional partners participate fully with Iraq, that there are many good reasons for this continued development to move on apace. This left us with a number of questions and a number of issues that still have to be studied and raised, as will always occur, but it was a very, very fruitful discussion, and I think it allowed each one of us to come away with a better understanding of the current situation and a more realistic appraisal of what the future is going to hold for our very important and our close friends in Iraq. And with that, I'll finish.
Thank you, John. Now we're reaching the middle of our panel and the kind of epicenter issue, if you like, and shifting tack slightly to a problem which long predates the last 10 years and does not involve direct US military involvement, and a problem, if you like, where NDU's interests and also ICSR's interests converge. The background to that panel or that workshop was I think, a stuttering peace process, if a peace process at all, and the topic which was addressed was what chance for peace in the Middle East. For this, I'm pleased to draw on another of our NDU partners, Dr. Michael Yaffe, who is Professor of Strategic Studies and International Relations, once again at NISA. Prior to joining NISA, Dr. Yaffe was a career foreign affairs officer in the US State Department, where he concentrated for the majority of his career on Middle East regional security and also the important issue of nuclear weapon non-proliferation. From 1993 to 2001, he served importantly on the US delegation to the Middle East peace process and still travels extensively in the region. So Michael, an easy question for you. What chance for peace in the Middle East?
Well, thank you, John. It may not surprise very many that we don't have the solution. That's not what's on this piece of paper. We had a very rich discussion in our group. It was a group that comprised of people who have been dealing with this issue for many years, who've heard the narrative, can repeat the narratives of each other in many different ways. And yet, there still was that eagerness to still reach out to each other, to learn more, and to try to find the bridging elements to try to find a way forward. The way we organized our program was that we first focused on the Israel-Palestinian issue. Then we broadened the aperture to focus on Israel, Syria, and Lebanon. And then thirdly, we opened it further to look at it in terms of the entire region and also the international community in general. We began by trying to more or less try to assess the current situation, which could be described as saying the situation is not optimal right now for peacemaking. I know that's a big shock for some of you. But there was agreement that there is an urgency for it, that the situation is not something that can simply be left to stagnate without having consequences, and many negative consequences that would not bode well for the future for peacemaking and actually may also lead to further conflict. Among the many factors that we discussed that were affecting Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, there were quite a few that were having a bearing that makes this issue more urgent than ever. One of those is the occupation, the settlement expansion, the blockade issues, and how they affect both the occupied and the occupier. And in this terms, it also is a broader scope to it because it is affecting also international attitudes towards this conflict. And it's also a question of where does this conflict now play in light of the other serious issues that are now playing on the international global scene? Is there a growing loss of interest? Is there a loss of interest of feeling in the sense that the parties in the region are not doing enough for themselves? And in this sense, may be leading to their own isolation. There are issues of demographic changes that are occurring, particularly in the Israel-Palestinian area, and how that has effects on legitimacy, how it has effects on identity, on how Israel defines a Jewish democratic state and what its future will be. The issue deals also with the problems of refugees that are now spread throughout the region and what happens to their future. The issue affects radicalization throughout the region the longer it is left unresolved. And now also we have the potential for nuclear weapon proliferation on the verge of seeing developments in Iran and then how that will affect proliferation throughout the rest of the region. So that is what's driving some of the agenda that we discussed. With regard to the way forward, we had several thoughts. First, with regard to proximity talks. To say that there was cautious optimism for the proximity talks, I think would be almost an exaggeration. Nevertheless, no one could really think immediately of the alternative to it, with the notion being that the proximity talks are, at least for now, the best chance for getting to direct negotiations. And it's something that there's a recognition, of course, that the proximity talks are in some respects a step backwards, since we have not really faced the issue of indirect talks between Israel and the Palestinians in almost 2 decades almost. So now they are taking this one small step. And so we will see where that leads to. If there was one thing that there was a general agreement, but there was not consensus on this, was the issue that the way forward centers around a two-state solution. Not everyone agreed with this, but the majority did. That this is the way forward, and this is where energies need to focus upon. And then the question is, within that two-state area, as a formula, where do you focus first? Again, there was not a general agreement, but I would say that my sense of it was that it was focusing on the issues of borders and security as the primary way forward.